The hammer came down with a sickening crack, not against steel, but against the bone of Kaito's thumb, crushing the nail instantly. He didn't scream, didn't drop the heavy iron sledge, and didn't break the rhythm of his breath, though tears of involuntary shock pricked his eyes. This was the 300th day of his apprenticeship on the misty peak of Mount Akuma, and pain had become just another sensory input to be acknowledged and ignored. Master Hiroshi, a man whose skin looked like tanned leather stretched over wire, watched from the shadows with eyes that missed nothing. "You flinched," the old man whispered, his voice cutting through the roar of the furnace and the pounding of blood in Kato's ears. "The steel felt your hesitation, Kaito, and now the integrity of the core is compromised by your moment of weakness." Kaito looked at the glowing bar of metal, the heat radiating off it enough to singe his eyebrows, and felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with his throbbing thumb. "It was an accident, Master," he gasped, his chest heaving as he tried to stabilize the heavy hammer for the next strike. "I am only human. The pain distracted me for a fraction of a second." "Human is an excuse for the lazy," Hiroshi replied, stepping into the light and tossing the ruined metal into the scrap pile with a dismissive clatter. "Kaizen is not about being human. It is about shedding the skin of who you were yesterday to become who you must be today. Start over, and if you miss again, you will hold the hot steel with your bare hand to learn the cost of error." This was the scariest level of discipline Kaito had ever encountered, a philosophy that stripped away the comfort of good enough and demanded perfection in the microscopic details. Most people think discipline is waking up early or going to the gym when you don't feel like it. But what Hiroshi taught was a terrifying, relentless obsession with the 1% improvement that nobody else would ever see. Kaito picked up a fresh bar of raw iron, his hand trembling slightly, not from fear of the heat, but from the crushing weight of the standard he was held to. He had come here seeking to be the greatest swordsmith in the Empire, imagining a montage of glorious training sequences. Instead, he found a hell where he was forced to sweep the floor until he could see his reflection in the dirt. "Look at the water in the bucket," Hiroshi commanded, pointing to the wooden pail sitting in the corner of the soot-stained forge. "It is still. It reflects the moon perfectly, because it is not agitated by the wind or the shaking of the earth. Your mind must be like that water, even when your body is screaming, even when the world is burning down around you." Kaito swung the hammer again, this time focusing not on the impact, but on the silence between the strikes, trying to find that stillness. Discipline, he was learning, was not a loud roar of motivation. It was a quiet, lethal whisper that said, "Again." It was the ability to do the boring, monotonous, painful work with the same enthusiasm as the final victory. Weeks turned into months, and the seasons painted the mountain in hues of cherry blossom pink, then deep emerald, and finally the stark white of winter. Kaito's hands transformed, the blisters callousing over into pads of skin so hard they felt like the horn of a bull. But the physical transformation was nothing compared to what was happening inside his mind, a rewiring of his very soul. One morning, Hiroshi woke him at 3, pouring a bucket of freezing river water over his sleeping form. "The Emperor has announced the grand tournament of blades," the master said, his breath misting in the frigid air. "You have 6 months to forge a katana that can cut through the fear in a man's heart." "6 months is a lifetime," Kaito grumbled, shivering as he reached for his robes, his body aching from the previous day's labor. "Most smiths take years to perfect a blade of that caliber, and I am still learning to control the hammer." But he stood up anyway, because the discipline had taken root, acting faster than his own conscious thought. "You will not forge a sword today," Hiroshi said, handing him a single grain of uncooked rice and a needle. "You will carve the kanji for patience onto this grain of rice. If you break the grain, you start over. If you crush it, you start over. You do not eat until it is done." Kaito stared at the tiny white speck in his palm, a task that seemed designed solely to break his spirit and drive him mad. He sat at the low table, the candlelight flickering, and brought the needle down, his breath held tight in his chest. The first grain shattered instantly under the pressure of his hand, the force he used for hammering totally unsuited for this delicacy. He reached for another grain, his stomach growling, the hunger a sharp pang that he tried to push into the back of his mind. Hour after hour passed, the pile of broken rice grains growing like a mound of failures at his knees. His eyes burned, his back spasmed, and his fingers locked into claws. But he did not stop. This is where most people quit, right at the threshold where the fun fades and the real work begins. This is the valley of despair, where the results are invisible, and the effort feels disproportionate to the reward. But Kaizen whispers that the obstacle is the way, that the frustration is the fuel you need to burn to get to the next level. By the third day, Kato had entered a trance state, his heartbeat slowing, his breathing becoming so shallow it was imperceptible. He wasn't trying to carve the rice anymore. He was trying to become the needle, to merge his intention with the action. He made a microscopic scratch, then another, correcting his angle by a fraction of a millimeter, a 1% adjustment. When he finally presented the grain to Hiroshi, the old master took a magnifying glass and studied it in silence for a long, agonizing minute. "It is sloppy," Hiroshi said, tossing the grain to a waiting sparrow. "The last stroke was rushed because you were excited to be finished. Do it again." Kato didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't rage against the unfairness of the world or the cruelty of his teacher. He simply bowed, picked up another grain, and sat back down. That was the moment the boy died and the master was born, the moment he fell in love with the process rather than the results. The scariest level of discipline is when you no longer need an external reward to keep going. It's when you stop looking for applause and start looking for flaws, hunting them down with a predatory instinct. Kato realized that if he couldn't control his hand on a grain of rice, he had no business controlling life and death on the edge of a blade. 3 months passed, and finally, he was allowed to approach the forge again. But this time, the steel sang a different song to him. He could feel the carbon moving within the iron, could sense the temperature shifts before the color even changed. He wasn't just hitting metal. He was rearranging the atomic structure of the universe through sheer force of will. He worked for 20 hours a day, sleeping in 15-minute bursts, just to reset his neural pathways. He ate standing up. He planned his next hammer strike while he chewed. He visualized the blade while he urinated. There was no separation between his life and his craft. They had fused into a singular, terrifying purpose. "You must fold the steel 1,000 times, Hiroshi instructed, watching Kato's rhythm, which had become as steady as a metronome. Each fold removes impurities. Each fold homogenizes the strength. If you skip one fold, you are a liar, and the sword will know." "Why does it matter?" Kato asked, sweat dripping from his nose and sizzling on the anvil. "Who will know if it is 999 folds? The eye cannot see it." It was the voice of his old self, the ghost of mediocrity, trying to find a way back in. "You will know," Hiroshi said, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled the sweat on Kato's back. "And because you know, your confidence will have a crack in it. When you face a challenge, that crack will shatter. Discipline is doing the work when no one is watching, so that you can stand tall when everyone is." Kaito kept folding, his shoulders screaming, his skin blistering and peeling and blistering again until his hands were unrecognizable. He adopted the Kaizen mindset of continuous improvement to his pain management. If his shoulder hurt, he adjusted his stance by an inch. If his grip failed, he changed the angle of his thumb. He treated his body like a machine that needed fine-tuning, not a temple to be worshipped. He realized that feelings are just suggestions, not commands. Your brain will tell you to stop 1,000 times before your body actually collapses. The discipline lay in ignoring the brain's panic signals and trusting the training. The night before the deadline, the blade was ready for the quench, the most critical moment in the creation of a katana. If the water was too cold, the blade would crack. If it was too warm, the edge would be soft and useless. Kato had to judge the temperature of the water and the steel by feel alone. In the pitch black of the night, he stood over the trough, the red-hot blade hissing in the damp air, holding his breath to steady his hands. He replayed every mistake, every broken grain of rice, every smashed thumb of the last year. They weren't failures anymore. They were data points, stepping stones that had led him to this precise second of clarity. He plunged the blade into the water. A scream of steam erupted, a violent, chaotic reaction that threatened to buckle his knees. But he held firm, his mind as still as the water in the bucket, counting the heartbeats, feeling the vibrations travel up his arm. When he pulled the sword out, the moon broke through the clouds and struck the steel. It didn't just shine. It seemed to trap the light, holding it within the layers of folded metal. The hamon, the temper line, rippled like a stormy sea, frozen in time, a testament to the violence of its creation. The day of the tournament arrived. The courtyard of the Emperor's palace, filled with the finest smiths from every province. They brought swords encrusted with jewels, hilts wrapped in gold-ray skin, sheaths painted with mythical beasts. Kato stood in his soot-stained rags, holding a sword that looked deceptively simple, almost plain in comparison. The Emperor's champion, a samurai of immense renown, stepped forward to test the blades. The test was simple but brutal, cut through a solid iron helmet without chipping the edge of the sword. One by one, the beautiful swords shattered, bent, or dulled against the thick iron, their makers weeping in disgrace. "It is impossible," whispered a smith next to Kato, clutching his broken masterpiece. "The iron is too thick. It is a trick." But Kato didn't listen. He was breathing in a 4-7-8 rhythm, lowering his heart rate, visualizing the molecular space between the iron atoms of the helmet. When Kaito handed his sword to the samurai, the warrior paused, looking at the blade with a frown. "It feels light," the samurai said, "as if it has no weight, yet it pulls my hand toward the target." It was the balance of perfection, achieved by shaving off micrograms of steel over weeks of polishing. The samurai raised the blade. Kato didn't close his eyes. He didn't pray. He knew what he had built. He had built it with the discipline of the rice grain, with the pain of the crushed thumb, with the integrity of the thousandth fold. There was no luck involved here, only the inevitability of cause and effect. The blade came down. There was no clang of metal on metal, only a sound like tearing silk. The iron helmet split in two, the halves falling away to reveal the clean mirror-polished cut. The blade remained pristine, not a single chip or scratch marring its deadly surface. Silence descended on the courtyard, a heavy, stunned silence that weighed more than the iron sledgehammer. The Emperor stood up, his eyes wide, and slowly began to clap. But Kato didn't look at the Emperor. He looked at Hiroshi, who was standing at the back of the crowd, leaning on his cane. The old master didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He simply nodded once, a microscopic dip of the chin. "It is acceptable," he mouthed, "but the tip could be 1% sharper." And in that moment, Kato smiled, because he understood that the game never ends. The victory wasn't the helmet. The victory wasn't the applause or the gold the Emperor would offer. The victory was the realization that he had become a man who could do the impossible simply because he refused to skip the boring steps. He had mastered the scary discipline of never being satisfied, of always hunting for that next 1%. This is the lesson for you, standing at the foot of your own mountain, looking up at the peaks of your ambition. You want the glory, the result, the shiny, finished product that everyone admires. But are you willing to sit in the dark and carve rice grains until your fingers bleed? Are you willing to fold the steel of your character when nobody is watching and you're tired and you just want to sleep? Kaizen isn't a soft, gentle process of self-care. It is a violent act of destruction against your current self to make room for your future self. It is looking in the mirror and saying, "I love you, but we can do better." Real discipline is scary because it isolates you. Your friends won't understand why you can't go out, why you're obsessed with details that don't seem to matter. They will call you intense, crazy, a workaholic. They will try to drag you back down to the comfort of the average, because your growth shines a light on their stagnation. But you must be like Kaito. You must accept the crushed thumbs and the cold water and the boredom. You must fall in love with the plateau, with the long stretches of time where nothing seems to be happening. Because under the surface, the steel is hardening, the carbon is aligning, and you are becoming a weapon. The world is full of people who start things with a burst of excitement and quit when the new car smell wears off. But the ones who win, the ones who change the world, are the ones who can endure the monotony. They are the ones who understand that consistency is the only magic spell that actually works. Think about your life right now. What is the grain of rice you are neglecting? What is the small, boring task you are skipping because you think it's beneath you? Go do it. Do it with a frightening level of intensity. Do it better than anyone has ever done it before. Don't wait for the motivation to strike like lightning. Motivation is a fickle friend who leaves when the party is over. Discipline is the loyal soldier who stays by your side in the trenches when the bullets are flying. Build the soldier, not the friend. Master Hiroshi once said that a sword is only as strong as the fire that forged it. Your trials, your pain, your failures, that is the fire. Don't run from the heat. Step into it. Let it burn away everything that isn't essential. Let it temper you until you are unbreakable. The scariest thing isn't the work. The scariest thing is looking back in 10 years and realizing you are exactly the same as you are today because you were too afraid of the grind. That is a tragedy. That is a wasted life. The discipline is the lifeboat that saves you from the ocean of mediocrity. So pick up your hammer. Pick up your pen. Pick up your weights. Whatever your tool is, grab it with a grip that refuses to let go. Swing it with intention. Swing it with the knowledge that every strike counts, even the ones that don't leave a mark. Be the person who scares others with their focus. Be the person whose dedication makes others uncomfortable. Let them whisper about your obsession while you are busy building your empire. Let them sleep while you are grinding. Let them dream while you are doing. Kaito went on to become a legend, not because he was born with magic in his veins, but because he practiced Kaizen. Until the practice became his pulse, he proved that greatness isn't an act. It's a habit, a terrifying, relentless, beautiful habit. And now, the question is turned to you. The furnace is hot. The steel is waiting. The hammer is in your hand. Will you strike with half a heart, or will you summon the scariest level of discipline the world has ever seen? The choice is yours. Strike